All right, that was a news update. We just brought you what's going on across the country just to keep you updated with what the news making the headlines are. Let's get into our first big story. Elections in Nigeria over the years have been characterized by irregularities, and in recent times, pre- and post-election violence have become the order of the day.
For this reason, stakeholders converged on Abuja to fashion out ways of improving Nigeria's electoral process. TVC News correspondent Joke Adisa tells us
This
more.
is yet another stakeholders forum on improving the nation's electoral process. Civil society organizations are interfacing with government officials on challenges and prospects for improved electioneering process in Nigeria. Discussants say renewed violence, financial inducements in elections, and other forms of electoral malpractices are taking the country back to the dark ages.
Looking towards 2019, this is certainly where we do not want to go to. With respect to Rivers, we had asked that INEC do address the multiple abuses that arose from Rivers elections, in which the two major political parties in the country must now acknowledge abuse of the electoral system, and that this threatens our democracy.
The inauguration of this committee is the first major step in the series of reforms that will be carried out to advance our electoral environment. The terms of reference of the committee includes the review of the Justice Owais Electoral Reform Committee, review of recent judicial decisions on election petitions as they relate to conflicting judgments. I wish to promise that we will implement the recommendations from this committee very swiftly.
INEC chairman discloses the commission has received the anti-graft agency's report on alleged shady deals in the December rerun legislative poll in Rivers State.
We have commenced a review of the report, and we shall make this public. We shall take administrative action on those who are found culpable, while the EFCC will go ahead and prosecute. From the report we have seen so far, some of them have returned money as an admission of guilt. In fact, in one state, virtually all the officials heading our local government offices were involved and returned money.
INEC is also advocating an amendment to the Electoral Act to provide a timeline for the determination of all pre-election petitions.
A time frame within which appeal should be disposed of is pertinent to allow for certainty, judicial certainty, in order to avoid the Abia experience. Court said, withdraw certificate forthwith. We did, and we are criticized for doing the wrong thing. But in the case of post-election litigation, it is very clear. Allow 21 days so that the person can appeal to the appeal tribunal. I think we need a new legal regime for pre-election petitions.
The Commission says it has commenced preparations for the 2019 general elections with the formulation of a strategic plan which stakeholders are expected to review and make necessary input. Joke Adisa, TVC News, Abuja.
All right, we're joined now by the Regional Director, West Africa, Ford Foundation, Innocent Chukwuma. It's good to have you join us right now.
Thank you for having me.
Good morning. And from our Port Harcourt studio, we have joining us a public affairs analyst, William Maranatha Nsobundu. All right, William, good morning. It's good to have you join us.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, Innocent, let's start with you right now. All right, we have to go on a break first before I ask any question. Let's go on a break and we come back on the program. Stay with us. All right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast, and on this segment, we are discussing the Independent National Electoral Commission and the challenges they have faced so far in the conduct of elections in Nigeria, and ways that everything can be improved when it comes to entrenching democracy in Nigeria. We have with us in the studio the West African Regional Director of Ford Foundation, Innocent Chukuma with us here, and from our Port Harcourt studio we have William Maranatha Nsobundu. He is a public affairs analyst joining us from there. Now let's start with the, I was going to ask earlier on, excuse me, when it comes to conduct of election, the kind of democracy we have, some analysts say it's totally the product of how the elections were conducted, because that's where everything starts from in the first place. From the evolution of electoral umpires in Nigeria up until now, how would you assess the progress? Have we learned a good lesson? Are we improving as fast as we're supposed to? Or are we still just crawling?
I will say in some instances we have improved in appointing the right kind of people. Certainly the immediate past INEC chairman, Professor Jega, was a good appointment, and he discharged his functions creditably well. But I would also say in some instances we've actually taken one or two steps backward. If you look at the June 12, 1993 election that everybody held, there were one or two things that were done in preparation for that election as far as legal framework was concerned that actually enabled the outcome we had before it was truncated. And that was that after the conduct of election in every polling station, and the result sheets were signed and countersigned and distributed to all the party agents, those result sheets in those polling stations were as valid and legal and can be taken. And those were what parties use in tabulating their results. So you didn't have to wait for the INEC headquarters in Abuja to announce the final result to know whether your party was winning or not. And that was what happened in Ghana. The MPP was already declaring itself as a winner before the electoral body announced, based on the validity of the election result at polling station. But in our own presently, we have to wait. It's only the one announced by the INEC headquarters that is considered authentic.
Okay, let's bring in the Maranatha and Nsobundu in Port Harcourt. Maranatha, he just made a very good point here, referring to the 1993 election. Of course, that has been tagged as one of the best elections we've had in this country so far. He talked about one of the reasons that the election was seen as the best. So why are we not going to adopt the system that we used during the 1993 election that made it the best in the country so far?
The system of election is judged to be a very good one. I think that was an option A4 that was initiated by the then Babangida administration. But in my opinion, Nigeria has to move beyond manual voting. I think we're overripe to implement electronic voting. The reality is that manual voting leaves a vacuum for manipulation by politicians, but electronic voting, in my opinion, has a better integrity. So the attempt, rather the introduction of electronic voting by INEC in the just recent elections is a welcome development. But what I think is that INEC has to find a way to project, or rather promote, a bill for electronic voting to be encapsulated in the Electoral Act of 2010. And that makes it, compulsory. And so, because we saw what happened in the last election, where the Supreme Court gave rulings, judgments, wherein manual voting superseded electronic. So I think if we're able to revise the Electoral Act to incorporate electronic voting, it's in the best interest of the nation, because it gives more integrity to our election process.
All right, we'll come back to you, Williams, right now.
Okay, let's give you some more information as far as that is concerned. The Independent National Electoral Commission is the body charged with the responsibility for organizing and supervising all elections to the offices of the President and Vice President. And the Governor, of course, and the Deputy Governor as well, National Assembly, State Houses of Assembly.
Now, the commission was formerly known as the National Electoral Commission and is headed by a chairman and 12 national commissioners. Now, let's examine the activities of INEC in detail since 1999, then when Nigeria returned to democracy. I'll take you to my wall now so we can have a better perspective of what we are talking about in here. Okay, let's get this started now. In 1998, former military head of state General Abdusalam Abubakar appointed Justice Ephraim Akpata as the chairman of INEC to conduct the 1999 transition election that brought in former President Olusegun Obasanjo into office. Shortly after that election, Justice Ephraim Akpata died in 2000. There and then, President Obasanjo appointed former diplomat Abel Gwobadia as the INEC chairman. Now, Gwobadia conducted the 2003 election, and that marked the beginning of what many Nigerians have called the dark days of INEC. That election was reportedly rigged and marred by irregularities of all kinds. Recall that it was at that time that the then opposition party, the Alliance for Democracy, lost about 5 of its 6 states to the PDP, except Lagos, where Bola Tinubu stood his ground as the governor at that time. And apart from that, other parts of the country also recorded lots of irregularities of all kinds that were reported at that time. Let's move on. Now, in 2005, Gwobadia retired as INEC chair and was succeeded by Professor Maurice Iwu. And Iwu's tenure also generated so much controversy as the 2007 election conducted under his watch was also marred by violence. Iwu at that time barred all foreign election monitors from covering the election, a decision widely criticized by politicians and civil society groups who called for his immediate removal from office. Now, let's get on with this. Now, the 2007 election brought the former President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua to power, and he openly admitted that the election that brought him to office was poorly conducted and marred by irregularities. Let's listen to him that time.
We acknowledge that our elections were not perfect and had lapses and shortcomings. However, we have well-established legal avenues of redress, and I urge anyone aggrieved to pursue them. I also believe that our experiences represent an opportunity to learn from our mistakes. Accordingly, I will set up a panel to examine the entire electoral process with a view to effective reforms and ensuring that we raise the quality and standard of our general elections to meet international standards.
That was on May 29, 2007, and that perhaps was the first time a political office holder would admit to such. Even at that, the late Yar'Adua remained in office. Let's move on now. In 2010, President Jonathan appointed the university Professor Atahiru Jega as chairman, and Jega's appointment appeared to change the perception of Nigerians and rekindle their hopes and confidence in INEC. Jega conducted the 2011 election that brought former president into power, and the election was largely believed to be free and fair, apart from a few post-election violence here and there that broke out in parts of the country. Now, let's move on. During the 2015 election campaign, Atahiru Jega faced fierce criticism from both the opposition and the ruling party. It was at that point that the electronic voting system brought the use of card readers was introduced. Now, that election was adjudged the most expensive election on the African continent. It was also seen to be free and fair. Though there were complaints about the card readers malfunctioning, it was that election that brought in President Muhammadu Buhari and also ended the tenure of Atahiru Jega, who perhaps took a bow when the ovation was considered loudest. Let's move on. Oh, okay. I think let's go on a break now, and then we come back to a round of activities on my wall. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast. Thanks for joining us on TVC Breakfast. We are discussing INEC on this segment and how it has performed over the years. We have been taking you on my wall here since 1999 when Justice Ephraim Akpata was elected as, or was appointed rather, by the President as the INEC chairman, the first INEC chairman, and then after him it was Ibrahim Gwobadia, and after him it was Professor Maurice Yu, and after him Professor Atahiru Jega, and that's what we are discussing right now. Let's look at the elections conducted by INEC under Jega as we move along. Now, the first set of elections were all declared inconclusive and marred by violence until after Jega, I mean to say, until recently, when it appeared that the INEC got the strategy right with the conduct of the Edo and Ondo governorship elections. The inconclusive elections were conducted under the watch of Professor Mahmoud Yakubu, who has barely spent a year in office as the current chairman of INEC. Now, let me come to you, Innocent, on this. First of all, let me talk about the issue of independence of INEC. How really independent, even though it is called Independent National Electoral Commission, but how really independent would you say INEC is?
I think INEC's independence has evolved over time and not fully there if you take the dictionary meaning of the word. But we have made some progress. Between 1999 and 2007, you had a situation where INEC had to go cap in hand to the Ministry of Finance to get its budgetary allocation, and that was what the government at the time used to control it. But after the fiasco of 2007 election and following the outcome of the Justice Uwais Committee's report that INEC's budget had to be moved to the first line charge so that it doesn't have to depend on the government in power to release money, and that improved INEC's work, because especially under Professor Jega, they had money enough to do their work, and even had to come to national television and say that money was not the problem facing INEC. But there were other elements that would make INEC fully independent, and the critical one is the appointment of the chairman and the commissioners. I remember Justice Uwais Committee recommended a situation where the president will nominate and the confirmation process will go through the National Assembly, and hopefully in that confirmation public hearings will be conducted so that Nigerians who have had interactions with this individual will come to testify as to their integrity. That hasn't happened, and there were also other recommendations of that committee that would have helped in addressing some of the situations we're seeing in election. Now, one is the setting up of an electoral offences commission. That hasn't happened because INEC needed to be stripped of all these additional responsibilities and focus on its core functions, which is conducting elections. So things including registration of voters, we need to have a voters registration body, things including prosecution of electoral offenders, which should surprise you that it's still saddled with INEC. It is still handled by that body. Things including delineation of constituencies in other jurisdictions. These are saddled with other bodies. So if we do that, INEC will be restricted to performing its core functions.
So there's too much on the table of INEC.
On the table of INEC. And we've had a lot of committees, and was watching the report, they said another committee has been set up. The National Human Rights Commission in 2014, with support from Ford Foundation, looked at all the electoral offences cases that are pending across the country and published a compendium, including recommending over 100 names of people who have been accused of involvement in all of this, and submitted to the Ministry of Justice. Up till now, they have not been prosecuted.
Okay, let's try and bring in Maranatha Nsobondo, if he's still there at the moment, Mike.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Nsobondo, of course, he talked about the waste report, and the waste report has been seen as a very good one to be adopted. Why are we finding it difficult to adopt the waste report? All right, I understand that it's not there anymore. But let me put the question, to you now. Why are we finding it difficult to adopt the OWAI's report in our electoral system?
I don't think it's a function of not adopting the report. It's a question of implementing its recommendations piecemeal. This committee, as you will remember, after completing its report, drafted even bills that should be passed to give legal effect to all these recommendations. And what did President Yar'Adua, who set it up, did? He set up another committee headed by the then Attorney General, to look into the report again and recommend another. So committees have become, if you like, an escape tunnel through which successive governments have used to escape from very clear responsibilities that would have moved the process forward. So yes, they implemented the issue of putting INEC on first line charge so that they will get its money directly from the Federation account. But the setting up of Electoral Commission, they have not done it. The setting up of another body to register political parties and register voters, including delineation of constituencies, have not been done. And these are the ones that are remaining to be done now. And what, for me, needed to be done is implement them rather than set up another committee. Now we have another committee set up by the Attorney General to review the electoral process.
We're setting up a committee to look into another committee's report. All right, let's get back to my wall in here. Now, under Mahmoud's watch, INEC has conducted 4 governorship elections, as in Kogi State, we have in Kogi State and in Bayelsa State. Now, those elections at first were inconclusive, were conducted but inconclusive, but along the line, they were certainly reconducted and rerun and so on. And we had Edo and Ondo elections that were conducted and concluded immediately. And they also had about 81 rerun parliamentary elections under Mahmoud. Now, let's look at other key areas of concern in here. Rigging and electoral violence in Nigeria can be traced to the post-independence days. Now, the country's first post-independence national election of 1964 and the 1965 in the Western region was characterized by widespread rigging, intimidation, and chaos, later creating serious constitutional concern. We remember the story, Esela Kintola and Chief Obafemi Awolowo at that time, and it culminated into the civil war of the military coup in 1966. Now, the 1979 elections that saw the emergence of Malam Shehu Shagari, as civilian president, was criticized by international observers as having been massively rigged. At the 1983 election, 4 years later, was even worse, marred by corruption, political violence, and polling irregularities. And that was what brought in General Muhammadu Buhari to power in 1983 through a coup. Now, let's move on now. Let's talk about a few elections marred by violence in the recent dispensation. The 2014 Ekiti State governorship election caused a lot of tension as soldiers were deployed to monitor the poll. Yet the election was characterized by rigging, ballot box snatching, and violence. And the election led to the coinage of a popular hashtag, Ekitigate. Some notable persons were indicted of misconduct during the election. Reports had it that violence of voice recording of notable politicians perpetrating electoral fraud was caught on tape at that time. All right, now let me move to let me get to Williams in here. Williams, when it comes to the capacity of INEC to conduct election, there are the issue of ad hoc staff and all of that. Is it the best interest of INEC and maybe even the entire democratic process for INEC to have ad hoc staff or to have permanent staff?
We are going through a period where Nigeria's revenue has dwindled drastically. And so I think it is expedient at this time that we have, INEC should have adult staff to save costs. With adult staff, you're able to dispense off the services once you're done with your election activities. But when you get staff on a permanent, on a basis in the payroll, you tend to incur much more cost in the longer run. That's my position.
All right, but we often hear sometimes that those who act as ad hoc staff sometimes are not paid their allowances, and we sometimes even go on protest demonstrating that their allowances be paid.
Since INEC is on the first line charge from the Federation account, I sincerely believe that INEC should put his house together to be able to sort out the issue of allowances for ad hoc staff. Because when you're not able to handle that, you expose the staff to a lot of compromise, with politicians. So the issue of allowances for ad hoc staff is very key. It's quite important. And so INEC must put its house together. That is their responsibility to ensure that ad hoc staff are paid and paid properly. That is my opinion on the matter.
All right.
I would like to
add a word. All right, just before you do that, I understand we need to go to break at the moment, and when we come back, you will give us that perspective.
Well, we thank William Maranatha for joining us. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, welcome back. Of course, it's still TVC Breakfast, and we've been taking a look at INEC and, of course, the challenges of electoral violence and rigging that face INEC. And, of course, we still have Innocent Chukuma here in the studio with us. Mike just talked about the use of ad hoc staff, and he asked if it's not possible for INEC to have permanent staff instead of using ad hoc staff.
I think the important first question to ask is, what do these ad hoc staff do, which will help us determine whether they need to be permanent staff or not. These are seasonal functions, election day activities like returning officers and all those role players within the polling station. And elections come every 4 years, with the exception of what has happened in this last 1 year under this current administration, where it has had to organize over 137 by-elections, which makes people begin to see it as an everyday function. They are every 4 years.
So for that reason, it will make sense
if
to
INEC makes ad hoc staff full-time staff, INEC budget will not be enough to pay their salary. And this is an era where over 80% of the budget is spent on recurrent expenditure. It's simply not possible.
But remember, INEC chairman, the current chairman, Professor Mahmoud Yaqub, in that report, did admit that, of course, some of INEC staff, many of them he said many of them admitted to have been induced financially and returned in money. So where do you bring in that if you do not have them as permanent staff? Do you not think that this situation is likely to continue?
Well, the whole thing, we need to understand the political economy around this and decide whether there's just one measure will solve it. This is a system where if you win election, right, you have almost total access to the till in an environment where there are very weak regulatory and accountable systems. So people deploy, politicians sell houses, borrow money. And if you are, whether you are an ad hoc staff or a full-time civil servant in Nigeria with the meager salaries that you are receiving, you will still be susceptible, to the same temptations. So we have to reduce the cash, the patronage system in our politics to make it unappealing for people to go out of their way to want to be elected, so that only those who are willing to serve will find public office attractive.
All right, now when INEC even has agreed to the fact that there are allegations against some people under its service to have been induced during elections, how does that impact on the
stable system. So people deploy, politicians sell houses, borrow money. And if you are, whether you are an ad hoc staff or a full-time civil servant in Nigeria with the meager salaries that you are receiving, you will still be susceptible, to the same temptations. So we have to reduce the cash, the patronage system in our politics to make it unappealing for people to go out of their way to want to be elected, so that only those who are willing to serve will find public office attractive.
All right, now when INEC even has agreed to the fact that there are allegations against some people under its service to have been induced during elections, how does that impact on the credibility of INEC itself?
It has a huge impact, which again speaks to the relevance of an electoral offences commission to prosecute these people. Because all INEC needed to do in this situation is hand over such personnel to this commission to deal with and focus on its core function. Now, because you don't have such a commission existing, and our regular court system is bogged down by all kinds, where on average it takes 5 to 10 years to conclude a case at the court of first instance. We're not talking about appeal court or Supreme Court. So going through the regular court processes to deal with this will bog it down. We need a body that will be saddled with it.
So you're saying in a sense that there needs to be some internal mechanism through which issues like this are dealt with rather than going to regular courts.
Yes, so the INEC will not have to come to be answering this. It's a clear crime against the law, and there are agencies set up to deal with it. Get on with it, and we get on with our work. Because there is no institutional agency where you don't have infractions. And when it happens, what do people do? They call in the police or other law enforcement agencies to deal with it. The same should be the case here.
Okay, I think we still have Williams Nsobundu from Port Harcourt joining us now. Let me go back to the issue of electoral reform. Since independence, there has been several reform committees put together to look into the electoral umpires in this country. Now, if we have to focus on the current INEC the way it is right now, a lot of recommendations have been made. But what most important areas are there to reform in INEC? Williams, can you hear me? All right, I guess we're still having connectivity issues with Williams in there. But before we go ahead, let me direct that question to you as it is right now. What areas are most very important to reform in INEC?
I think William started with it when he talks about the electronic voting system. Now, electronic voting system as a system has various components. We've implemented about 2 of it, which is electronic registration, electronic verification system. Now the main one is an electronic transmission, voting and transmission system. And what is bogging it down is actually legislative. The National Assembly has refused to include this provision in the Electoral Act that will oblige INEC to do so. It will even be surprise you that things as basic as the verification system is not in the Electoral Act, and that was why in some cases in the Electoral Tribunal, especially Delta State, the electronic verification system was thrown out because the judge ruled that it was unknown to the Electoral Act because it's not there. So we need a legislative framework to deal with that. And then the other one is what I alluded earlier, that let INEC focus on organizing election as an electoral umpire. All these other additives, all these other functions about constituency delineation, registration of political parties, even registration of voters should be taken away by other bodies, so the INEC knows that what is set up to do is organize election. And I believe with that limited functions, they will improve in their effectiveness and efficiency.
Okay. Okay, let's bring in. We understand
Nsobundu
is back on with us now. Right, we've been talking about electoral voting system, and Innocent talked about getting the National Assembly to do a legislative work on that so as to get it recognized. How do you think that the National Assembly, that we need to get the National Assembly to be able to get the legislative framework that is needed to properly recognize this in our electoral system?
Thank you for that question. It is my very candid opinion that the INEC, as electoral umpire, has the primary responsibility to pursue a revision of the Electoral Act to incorporate electronic voting. I also expect the federal government to provide immense support in terms of pushing that bill through, because we have come to understand that once you have cordial relations between the executive and legislative arm of government, INEC is more or less an extension of the executive arm. So you are able to push through bills in the interest of the nation. We have come to a point as a nation where we need to adopt best global practices with respect to conducting elections. Manual voting is archaic, is outdated. It's no longer obtainable. It is prone to a lot of manipulation. And when you look at that, it becomes expedient. We need to look at, I think INEC should take this issue seriously, take it with a sense of urgency to ensure that this bill is brought forward to the National Assembly.
Oh, all right.
And
William,
I also expect that the National Assembly, yes, okay.
Okay, yeah, William, let me ask you this as we wind down this segment now. Now, I'm glad you are in Port Harcourt. From the experience we just had from the parliamentary election and even the previous election, governorship election there, how are political parties compounding the challenges before INEC?
Political parties have a distinct role to play from what INEC is doing as an electoral umpire. But what I would rather say is that INEC is an independent body. So political parties might exert some level of influence on personnel, INEC personnel, whose integrities are very weak. But to a large extent, INEC as a body has an integrity that should be distinct from some bad eggs within INEC. So in Rivers State particularly, I don't see political parties exerting any negative influence or compounding the work of INEC per se. Yes, there are utterances in the social media, in the mass media, that tend to heighten political tensions, no doubt, during the recent rerun elections in Rivers State. But all the same, I think issues that have to do with heightened tension politically should be dealt with by the security agencies and not INEC. So generally, I don't see political parties exerting any much influence on INEC for elections.
Williams,
INEC knows its onions.
All right, Williams, we'll come back to you on this. Let me bring in Foladele to give us a perspective of reactions on social media.
Never call me.
No, certainly, you know, I'll always call you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ike. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks.
Good morning, Innocent, and good morning to Williams. Okay, so we had quite a number of elections this year, so it's only right that we evaluate INEC's performance and see what some people are saying online about how they performed this year. And of course in the past as well. Okay, Umar Idris says, you can't say the present INEC is a colossal failure. Kindly look at the root cause of the failure, violence and rigging. Blasted Up says, I wonder how people blame INEC for forgery, violence, rigging. I beg na INEC they vote. Blame the people and politicians who incite violence. Antoinette says, recent precedents has shown that elections conducted by present-day INEC is marred by rigging and violence and ends up inconclusive. Adesoji Adetayo says, National Assembly in Nigeria should enact death sentence law on INEC officials who participate in electoral rigging because they are hindrance to democracy. I don't know about death sentence. Okay, and the last one, because we have to go. The case, Osagiede says, the case of the more you look, the less you see. INEC has evolved in terms of rigging. I have to go because of time, so I won't be able to take
go now.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Thank
Fola.
you.
Thank you.
Fola,
All
thank
right,
you.
this is where we have to really end this segment right now. Innocent Chukwuma, thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you
very much. And Williams Maranatha Nsobundu, thank you for joining us from Port Harcourt. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. We go on a break and then we come back to discuss another topic. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.